Yeah? Okay. Thanks for coming to listen to this talk. My name's Helen Thackray. For the last, just coming up to 3 years, I've been looking at hacking-related communities, looking at the social identity and the group processes that are there. So in this talk, I'm going to go through some of the basics of social psychology, and then I'm going to give a couple of examples of why it might be relevant or interesting, and then I'm going to discuss my results. This is going to be the least technical talk of the day. I did notice in the brochure that after my intro paragraph, there were a couple of others that got more technical. That's not my talk. I'm sorry if you're here for that. Feel free to go. But so I'm going to share some of the results that I've had and answer any questions you have. So, my research looks at the psychological influence of social group processes online. All human behavior is influenced by the presence of others. You change your behavior slightly depending on who you're with. So, for example, very few people would be the same with their parents as they are with their best friend. It just makes sense. If you're by yourself, you might be more comfortable doing all sorts of things. If you know that you're being watched by others, you're in public, maybe you'll act slightly differently. You know, you won't fart or pick your nose or watch porn. Some people, there's always the odd exception. I'm also looking at the hacker social identity. What is a hacker? What makes a hacker a hacker? Who decides if a hacker is a hacker? It's also, I think it'll be relevant for this group as well. The overlap between InfoSec and hacking is huge nowadays, and yet InfoSec still talk a lot as if hackers are the enemies. Well, they might have hackers in the midst of them. It's just an interesting distinction that people are still making. So, what is social identity? Basically, human brains, we're kind of lazy. We like to find shortcuts to everything. And so it's much easier to take in information in the world if you categorize it. So we put ourselves and others into groups. These are known as identity groups, and they can be based on where you're born, where your parents were born, what gender you have, the color of your skin, sports teams, hobbies, all different sorts of things. So everyone that's here today, you obviously have an interest in hacking-related things. That could be one of your chosen identities. Some you choose, some you don't. People that are supporting Sweden instead of England today. Maybe it's because you're Swedish, maybe it's because you just don't like England. Who knows? But everyone has these different group identities that they have chosen or have had thrust upon them. And these groups are an important source of pride and self-esteem. Your self-image relates to the reputation of your group. So if you are part of a group that you are perhaps not willing to mention in public, it suggests that there's either some social bias against them, they're not socially accepted, or it's just a bit embarrassing. So, what is a hacker? There are so many different definitions. I'm sure if I asked all of you for your idea of what a hacker is, I'd get some different answers. When I say a hacker, I'm referring to a computer hacker. Not all hackers are computer hackers. I know this. You can be a hacker without touching a computer. But computer hacking is the ability to access a computer or a system without admission. That's from Raymond. And the subset of that is a hacktivist, because I also look at that. It's someone who isn't happy with how things are, wants to protest socially, politically, and they use computer-related resources. So hackers are part of an imagined community. Basically, you've all chosen to be a part of this community. It doesn't matter about the geography, it doesn't matter about where you were born, what you do in the rest of your life. You've chosen this. It's an imagined community. It's not based... Yeah, I'm repeating myself there. And the great thing about hackers is, I've found, you create groups that give expertise, support, training. You do events like this. You get enthusiastic. It's really great. I get really into this, by the way. So, just briefly, hacker types, ability and motivation. This isn't my nice circle, but I think and I know it's very basic. There are so many more types that you can add in there. But if you think about it, you can fit a lot of the hacker types into these different groups. So, for example, you've got ideology. People that hack for ideology are hacktivists. Just to say, the closer the black dot is to the outside of the circle, the more what's the word? Sophisticated. There we are. It's right in the middle there. The more sophisticated they have to be. So those who do it for prestige, coders, they have to know what they're doing. You can't just sort of join up and then be an expert. You have to work at it. Those that do it for recreation, novices, punks, people that like to wind other people up. Then you've got revenge hackers, crowdsourcers, insiders, whistleblowers, I suppose, would also fit in there, but it depends on the motivation. Those that do it for profit, criminals, generally speaking. But I suppose you could also actually put InfoSec in there if you wanted. I don't know, it'd be interesting, the different areas. So, now into the social psychology of things. Talking about social identity, it's individuals joining a group. Individuals act differently than when they're in a group. A person is smart. People are dumb, panicky, dangerous animals. If you have one person, you present them with a problem, they might calmly solve it. If you have 10 people and have an emergency problem, people might panic. They don't know what to do. They look to each other for guidance, for information, for cues. Because when we're in a group, our way of thinking changes. Just quickly, when you're online, there's such a thing as the online disinhibition effect. This is when you act differently because you're online, because you're behind a computer. You've got, in theory, some anonymity. You don't have to be who you are in your everyday life. There are two types of online disinhibition. Toxic, which can be antisocial behavior, abusive, all those delightful YouTube comments telling you to go do rude things. Cyberbullying, flaming. Then there's the benign disinhibition, where you're using the anonymity in order to be open, in order to talk about things that you might not feel comfortable doing face-to-face with people, finding support for health problems that you might have, talking about traumatic experiences. It can be very therapeutic, very helpful. And this is just another way of looking at the internet, the good side and the bad side. So, back to groups, thinking differently. How many of you know the term groupthink? Basically, when you go into a group, you are more likely to start agreeing with all the other people, just because you want to be in the group. You want to feel like you're all working together for something. And it's been shown that being in this group, you suppress your disagreement. You're less likely to argue about things. You don't necessarily think of all the possible alternatives because you just want to come to a quick group answer. And this can lead to the illusion of invulnerability. If you're in a group, well, of course, we're right. We all agree, therefore. Collective rationalization. So you might say, you might overlook problems or alternatives because, again, you're working together. You're all just you're looking for the quick, easy answer. So again, as I said before, we categorize things into groups. We then can take the stereotypes of those groups. So when we have an opposing group that we don't like, we always attribute, bad things to us. If our football team wins, it's because we're skilled. If our football team loses, or the other team cheated, or they did something. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but there's been a lot said in the football about Colombia's dirty tactics. If it had been two other teams, if it hadn't been England playing, would we be that upset with them? Or would we just think, yeah, that's just how they're playing? There's also the pressure to conform. No one wants to be sort of the minority that everyone thinks, being awkward, being difficult, why can't you just agree? And we can all come to this conclusion and get on with it. There's also self-censorship. So you are more likely to stop yourself from saying something. And groupthink becomes more prevalent when the groups are highly cohesive, when they work together well. You can get very sort of tunnel-visioned. I found this in computing departments in university quite a lot, actually. They get very tunnel-visioned. They know that they know their area. They are very good at what they do. But that means they don't always think of outside problems, especially in high-pressure situations when time is of the essence or you need an answer. Ironically, groupthink reduces the probability of success. The more you're thinking in a group, you're not thinking of all the alternatives, you're less likely to be able to actually achieve your goal. And the pressure to agree means that people become inaccurate and irrational in their thinking. they might not want to listen to reason because they want an agreement, a consensus, so they can move on with whatever the task is. So another social psychological element, informational influence. The desire to be correct. No one wants to stand up in front of everyone and say something really stupid. I'm taking that risk today. But we also look to others for how we should behave. For example, how many times have you been there waiting to cross a road in a crowd and the lights aren't green for the pedestrians, but someone looks and then they cross. And then other people cross. And then everyone starts crossing. It's kind of like wildebeest in the Serengeti. Because they've made this assessment, we think, well, obviously, they know what they're doing. They might be right. If someone is walking with purpose on their way here and you're lost, you might think, oh, they know where they're going, I'll ask them. It could just be that they've got a very confident walk. So we always use other people to signal what we should be doing, how we should be doing it. We tend to rate their judgment as more reliable than their own. Basically, there can be a lot of self-doubt. But it's interesting, especially in hacking communities. There's self-doubt, and then there's also a lot of confidence. I'll talk about that a bit more later. But that is another reason that when in a group, we conform to the group think, the group answer, because we think, well, if all these people are saying it, they must be right. Then you have normative influence. You pressure to conform to the norms of the group. So if you do disagree, you're not going to say anything because you want to stay in the group. If others agree with their opinion, they start to express a stronger opinion. You can get more polarized. So, for example, I'm trying to think. If you're slightly sort of right-leaning in your politics and you get a group of other slightly right-leaning people, you can all end up going far more right-wing than you ever intended to, because you sort of egg each other on in a way. And you think, well, they're agreeing with me, so this is the right way of thinking. And this is just another way that groups can be manipulated and just sort of go a bit wrong, really. One of the important things of normative influence is whether or not people think they're being watched by other people. So if, for example, you're in an area that says it's got CCTV, you're going to modify your behavior so you're not doing anything that might get you in trouble. Or if there's another group that's an opposing group, football teams again is a good one, you're going to behave, look slightly more like a team. You're not going to bicker in front of them. Family reunions, good one, a good example for that. In groups and out groups, you may be thinking, why is there a Triforce up there? In case anyone doesn't know, Triforcing was from, I think, Zelda? Right, this is a screenshot from 4chan. And whilst a lot of the things that happen on the internet, you think, yeah, that's just, an inside joke, that is significant psychologically. In groups and out groups, there is a copy paste to Triforce. Yay! So everyone can do the Triforce, which is signaling that you know how to do it. If you can do the Triforce, you're a part of the 4chan group. You know the in-jokes. So someone copied the Triforce, asked if it's working, then you get a noob who actually did copy it, and of course it came out wrong, because that's the point of Triforcing. You can't copy and paste it. You have to know how to do it. So this was all a big setup for the poor noob who got trolled, who outed themselves as not belonging to the group because they don't know how to Triforce. So, if you've got groups, you've got other groups. If you've got other groups, you get conflict. Everyone wants their group to be best. As I said before, you get self-esteem, you take pride in your group, you want it to be good. There are groups that disagree with your aims, your ideas. People don't like that. So you find good things about your group and discriminate towards the out-group, them versus us. Social categorization. It can happen without you even thinking about it. You look at someone, you mentally put them in a category. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing depends how you feel about that category. So when you start putting them in categories, you can start stereotyping again, and you exaggerate it, especially when you're in groups. So the group I like, great. Again, football teams, I'm going to keep going back to it. Sorry if no one else likes football. I've gotten into it for the first time this year. So, the England team. stereotypes. You know, they're gents. They haven't been doing dirty fouls or anything like that. Other teams, well, you know, they're just getting lucky. The Brazilians, they just didn't click. Groups that you like, you find similarities with. So I can't think of a football team that England likes. I'm a noob. But again, groups become more polarized than individuals. Once you're in a group, you are more likely to have an extreme opinion to when you're by yourself. So what does all this have to do with online groups? Well, all these behaviors, how are they still, are they still applicable online? That's part of what my PhD research is looking at. Again, with the groups conflict, what causes a group to infight? So you're not fighting against another group, you're fighting amongst yourselves. Basically, you can disagree about what is socially acceptable. In hacking communities, it's about what sort of methods you use to achieve your goals. Are black hats right? Are white hats right? Are they just being naive? Are black hats just, you know, trying to be difficult? Groups can reach a certain size, and then there is always a sort of schism. The bigger they get, the more different people they have, the less unity there is. So everyone has their own different ideas. There's a limited number of resources for what you're doing. So it's cooperation versus competition. It may be that you want to do things differently. You get a couple of other people that want to do it differently. And then you've got a subgroup within the group. Sometimes that's fine, and that works well. Other times it means you have to split off and do your own thing. So I think the example I have there is Anonymous, the hacking collective hive mind, started on 4chan, which probably won't surprise any of you, but when I talk to the general public, they are quite surprised because, you know, they were hackers, not the irritating people on 4chan. And it started on 4chan as a game. And then some people said, well, we've got this collective power. We can do things like, you know, send pizzas to a radio DJ who annoys us, or take out a website for a few hours. Or we could use this for good. We could make a difference. And half the people who were there just for the lols were like, nah, I don't want to. I just want to troll people. And others were like, well, yeah, I want to be part of something productive. So they had to split. So then you had the trolls left, and Anonymous became a thing. So you have a group, you've had your arguments, you've split off into your separate sections, you know who you like, who you don't like, why you don't like them, you've come to your conclusions. Impression management. It matters how the rest of the world sees you. You have to take control of your reputation, of your style, as it were. Trouble is, again, in the group, you're not thinking clearly as you might. You can start to believe your own propaganda. I think a perfect example of this is the US president. Bless him. He's just so convinced of his own... Yeah. Let's not go into politics. So, in order to maintain a reputation, in order to create your brand, as it were, you control the information in social interaction. You be careful about what you say. You say positive things. You try and influence others' perceptions. You try and show them the merits of your group. Show why they should want to be a member. And this has changed online. Memes are a great way of doing it. But it's all about controlling how you are perceived, which is harder when you're in a group because there's so many other people. And then finally, the other thing that I look at is trust. Trust requires the individual to relinquish control. Depending on the individual, that can be very easy or really hard. There is the expectation that others will reciprocate. So if I start telling you things about myself in a one-to-one conversation, in theory, to keep the conversation going, you'll start telling me about yourself. We'll ask each other questions. We'll exchange information. But it'll be mutual. If you start telling all your personal history to a person and they don't share anything of theirs, you might feel a bit awkward. Either they're not interested, or it's just there's something that doesn't feel quite right. There has to be an exchange. Online, there's no visual clues for the trust. So if I'm talking one-to-one with someone, eye contact, posture, body language, all these things will tell me whether or not you're happy talking to me, interested, if you're twiddling your moustache in an evil way. All these things might alert me to whether or not everything's normal. Online, you can't do that. All you have is the text or image, and they can take their time preparing it. So it's really hard online to gauge it in a one-to-one conversation. However, group membership, strong predictor of trusting behavior. If you're somewhere that is specifically designed for your group that you have identified with, you are far more likely to trust them than if you're just in a random chat room or talking on Reddit. I mean, even Reddit, to an extent, you can say that's a chosen social identity. But it's so large that you need to feel that there's more in common. So you might be in your subreddit, your preferred subreddit where you like to post. And so you'll be more likely to trust someone else that is also a regular poster in that subreddit. So a lot of people say that they don't actually trust anyone on the internet. Why would you? You'd be an idiot too. Because, on the internet no one knows you're a dog. But how far does that actually go? I mean, if you think about all the things we use for the internet, for, so online banking, for example, there's a lot of trust there because not only do they have your money, they've got personal data, and you're having to log on to their website. You're trusting, unless you're clever enough to know how to actually test it, that they have got the right security protocols, that they're not going to be, hacked or vulnerable or anything else. Trust isn't just with other people, it's with institutions, organizations, companies, and no matter how much you know, there's always comes a point where you have to think, okay, I'm going to use this. There's also an element of fatigue, where basically we get tired of having to work everything out. I don't know about you guys, but since doing this PhD, having to take extra steps with my security, I get so tired of it. Sometimes I do just say, yes, remember me on this computer, and I won't bother to log in again. Someone else could take my computer. But the security of it, it's hard for people. So, why am I telling you all this? Basically, my research is looking at all those things that I've just talked about and seeing if I can find them on online forums, in hacking conferences, in different chats, all over the place. The point of my research, no one's actually ever looked. There's so many papers on hackers, the good guys, the bad guys, everything else. No one's ever looked at the social psychology of it. How does hacking behavior change when you're in a group? We know that human behavior changes. Are hackers, this separate group that aren't subject to the flaws of humans? I don't think so. But there's also a huge element of, if you say the word hacker outside of contexts like this, everyone goes, oh yeah, bad guys. No, well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. My favorite example of how hackers are people, on some dodgy forum, I can't remember which one it was, but they were talking about hacking, cracking, selling credit card details, all of that. They also had a pets corner, where they told stories about their pets. And if that doesn't show you how human everyone is, I don't know what can. So part of my work is raising public awareness and understanding, and illustrating the importance of human factors. Every computer, there's a human at one end. Whatever you're doing on the internet, there's a human at the other end. We've got a lot of automated things. It's always a reflection of human society, human values, whether it's good or bad. Like I think there was the AI by Microsoft that, I think it was Twitter, turned it evil in like 24 hours or something. There's also the element of informing policy and legislation, because I don't know about you guys, but I get really confused about what isn't legal in which countries. There's a whole lot of grey areas. And, of course, expand cyber psychological knowledge. I'm not at all doing this because it's meant I've got to spend 3 years on a computer rather than actually talking to people. It's great. So how does the internet change human behavior? Also trying to make it so that if someone else wants to come along and do research like mine, there's a methodology, there's a way of doing it. So, I'm going to talk about my data now, which is my favourite bit. This has all been collected over the last couple of years. The first survey questionnaire was posted on 16 hacking-related forums and 15 hacking-related subreddits. Had 155 responses to the questionnaire. Also had quite a few comments from people where I was posting. Some of them liked it, some of them didn't. Some said rude things about my mother. She promised me they're not true. I also did some interviews with 14 volunteers, 9 of whom I would say, we would say are experts, 2 mid-level, 3 that are just getting started, very unsure, didn't know if they actually qualified to be interviewed. I was like, if you want to be interviewed, you qualify. Because psychology. 10 of the people I spoke to identified themselves as white hats, but they also said in the past, I've done grey, black things. One or two identified themselves as black hats. And then my final survey was done earlier this year, 11 forums, 17 subreddits, 197 responses. I'll go through the results in a minute. One thing that is very important to state, there was no test for people to pass in order to take part in this survey. I asked people on hacking-related communities. They might not all be hackers. I didn't set them any hoops to jump through in order to qualify. So, results. The blue is 2017, red is 2018. First off, I didn't ask for much in the way of demographic information, where you're from, what ethnicity you are, because weirdly, hackers don't like it when you ask them a lot of personal questions. Who knew? So, the age range, for the first one, I had a lot more younger people going up to, and a lot of people quite suspicious, didn't want to answer. That's fair enough. 2018, the red columns, the biggest group was the 26 to 35-year-olds. In both, the average age of those taking part was in the 30s, which sort of contradicts the stereotype of the, hooded teenager in a basement. When I presented this at academic conferences, people were quite surprised. They were like, oh, they're not teenagers. No, adults can hack too. You know what? Some people get into it as a teenager. They get older. They still like doing it. Gender. This shouldn't be a huge shock to anyone. Lots of guys. Not so many girls. A couple of transgender. Or people that said they were transgender. I did get comments and feedback from a transgender hacker who was really pleased that that was included. But the other result could have just been someone saying it. Or other, no answer. Because I have to give you the choice of not answering. So, in the first survey, one of my questions was, do you consider yourself a hacker? Bearing in mind, I had only posted this survey link on sites that were hacking communities. People were there for hacking, they discussed hacking. Are you a hacker? 52% said yes. 33% said no. And the rest preferred not to answer, which my cynical supervisor told me means yes. I find this really interesting because it comes back to something that I'm discussing a bit later on, is what makes you a hacker. But, so, only 52% felt confident enough to say yes. If they said yes, they were shown the options. Again, 2017 is in blue. So I asked them to say which category or subcategory they would put themselves in. So I've got hacktivist, cyberpunk, elite, script kiddie, cracker, grey hat, black hat, white hat. What surprised some people about this was people identified as a script kiddie. Sorry. Where that's often used as an insult. You know, if you don't know how to code or anything, you can't do your own hacking, you download someone else's, you're a skid. People acknowledged that they are skids, which was quite surprising to...
That's used to excuse yourself for your perceived lack of knowledge?
Yeah, possibly. It's a humility thing. If I insult myself before someone else can do it. And the other thing that was quite interesting, more grey hat hackers than white in 2017, in the blue. Possibly because it's not very clearly defined. However, 2018, the reason I've got more answers on this is I didn't ask this question. I didn't ask people, do you think you're a hacker? I just dove straight in and said, which category are you? So many more people answered. I also added in the InfoSec because it occurred to me that there is this huge overlap. Some people might put themselves in both. You didn't have to choose just one answer. So I also had people that said they were white hat, black hat, grey hat. Yeah. One of the other things I asked in the 2017, I started off with privacy, anonymity. That was all very much as you'd expect. There was some trade-off between security, privacy. Generally speaking, privacy good, security good, surveillance bad. But this interested me quite a lot. So I don't know if you can read it, but the blue is where they agreed or disagreed. Weaknesses and flaws should be exposed in systems and software. Very clearly, strong agreement there. Weaknesses and flaws should be exploited in systems and software. That's the green. A lot more disagreement there. And again, this is a way I can say hackers, the hackers that took this survey, they want to expose the weaknesses and flaws. They want to improve the systems. Don't necessarily want to exploit it. Again, this is helping with the InfoSec who think it's very black and white. So, I'm not expecting you to read this wall of text. This is from the interviews, social identity, what is a hacker? So some talked about how it's changed from the early 90s. Now it's synonymous with, the bad guys. A hacker is someone that has deep knowledge of what they're doing. They can use their skills to overcome a problem. Someone who's skillful, not necessarily with the right tools, but gets the right end results. This sort of response led me to question if there is a hacker mindset. Is there a certain mind type that is more inclined to become a hacker? Some people said yes, some people said no. But the hacker mindset is that you think in a certain way, kind, innovative, creative, passionate, obsessive. Playing with tech has to start with the mindset. Not a skill set, but a mentality. They want to understand how it works. So then, who are the hackers? Where I've asked, are you a hacker? 33% said no. So who decides if you are a hacker? Some people said it's an honourable title. Some people say you don't get to choose. It's what the community decides. Others say, I can't see that quote there, but someone else said, no one else can tell you if you are a hacker or not. You know. You either have that sort of creativity, that mindset, that drive. That's what's important. And then the fact that hacker now, it's not simple to define. There are so many different elements all wrapped in together. And then talking about trust, and one of them quite rightly said, it's the biggest problem these days on the internet, not just for hackers, but for humans. Trust? Lamau. This is the internet. I don't trust shit. Sorry, this is meant to be PG, so I didn't say that. That person, I took that question further, and they said they didn't trust anyone. I said, okay, but they ran a forum. I said, do you do everything on the forum? He was like, yeah, it's all me. I was like, okay, so you don't have any moderators or admin? Oh yeah, but they do what I tell them. I was like, well, are you there checking every day what they're doing? Well, no, of course not. I don't even know them. But you're trusting them to follow your rules, what you want. That is trust. He is putting the care of his forum in the hands of strangers, based on the fact that they have volunteered to do it, and they have an interest, and have been members of this forum. In terms of, if you go on the forums, you see so many, help me hack this Facebook thing. Some of them saying, if they ask a legitimate question, if they've put in effort, that means, yes, I'll help them. Don't necessarily trust them. And then I had a very suspicious participant who said, don't trust anyone, even in real life. I questioned that. I asked, what about your parents? Yeah, I guess. Okay. If you want my trust, it means you want to take advantage of me. I think that's As a human, that's a bit sad. As someone that's studying hackers, that's pretty sensible. In terms of anonymity and privacy, the internet was never built for security. That's why it's so vulnerable. You're being watched, it's the internet. Ironically, not government surveillance, corporate interest. And I think that's pretty spot on. So, from these interviews, there was a lot more in them, but, there's only so many quotes you can read on a PowerPoint slide. But from this, I felt there is a clear hacker social identity, but it doesn't necessarily make a cohesive group. There's no sign of groupthink necessarily, except in smaller areas. Some people felt it was a good thing, that it brought everyone closer together. Other people felt it was sort of gatekeeping. It was a way of saying, we're in, you're out, which isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing. There's also, obviously, a cautious approach to trusting others online. Didn't see online disinhibition effect, so there was no change in how they acted or reacted. One thing that was interesting is that they were all very aware of the consequences of their actions. So their approach to privacy changed. Some people were super duper secretive, to the point where they sort of modified their cell phones to... Why am I saying cell phones? I'm English. Modified their mobiles so that it didn't have internet GPS tracking, all these things, so they could do it as they liked. Others put everything online, because that way you've removed the challenge. No one's going to try and dox you if it's easy to find. Where's the fun in that? Signs of constancy and knowledge from newcomers. You're more likely to be trusted, more likely to be welcomed into the community, and always protect your personal privacy. So, that led on to me doing my second survey, the 2018 one. Just going back to this, the self-categorization, a lot more InfoSec, partly because I've been talking at hacking conferences, InfoSec conferences, so these people were following my work, and saw the link, answered it. And again, the grey hat, white hat, black hat. So, of those that identified as black hat, grey hat, or white hat, I asked them if they would put themselves on a scale. 0 being completely black hat, happy to do illegal, bad, whatever. White hat, only follows the law, legal, moral, everything. And this is the distribution of it, which I thought was quite interesting. The higher the dot, the more people said put themselves in that position. So the most people obviously put themselves as very, very white, which, sort of aligns with the number of InfoSec. What was interesting, though, is it spreads all the way down. Some people really happy to put themselves completely immoral, completely illegal. So I got even more interested in that, and I looked at which groups had put themselves where. So obviously the black hat down the black hat end. White hat, quite spread out. I mean, it's mostly from, 50 to 50 plus, but there's one way down the bottom there. And the grey, as expected, sort of clustered in the middle. I've not found any other data showing where people would put themselves on the white-black scale. The final part of my survey was I gave some statements. I asked people to rate how genuine, trustworthy, moral or ethical, and how you personally felt about it. Or the values that I'm showing are the average, obviously. So this statement, open source doesn't mean you can ask the author for anything, and he's obliged to deliver. If you can't read, write source code, that's not my problem. So in terms of genuine turned out to be a bit of a problem one, because, so here I told them, for genuine, it's how sincere you believe the statement or request is. That seems, overall, people thought that was a genuine statement. The author, relatively trustworthy, maybe not going out of his way to be helpful. The author's integrity, how moral or ethical it is, just over 50%. Maybe people felt that he should have been more helpful. And your personal response, how you felt about that statement, again, sort of just over halfway positive. This statement, no clue how to hack or anything. about it. So can someone give me a step-by-step tutorial on how to get an Instagram password? Trying to see booty pics. So this is where the genuine one confused people. I mean, the author might be genuine, like genuinely wanting to be told how to hack Instagram, but it's not a genuine request as in, a good request. So, less than 50. Not trusted. Didn't like the author. Very negative response. I was doing this to try and measure how people responded to different statements to see if there's a consensus and elements of group processes. This one discusses the hacking that he knows, asks for resources, goes into detail. Very positive responses across the board. And this one was interesting because it was so divisive. If you work for a government, you're told what to do. Therefore, how can you truly be a hacker? That is quite an old school hacker statement, back to when it was anti-authoritarian, doing things as a rebellion, don't do what you're told type thing. However, a sort of more negative response, not as negative as booty pics, but people didn't like that, possibly because a lot of them work in InfoSec and have to follow the law, and therefore do what the government tells them. So it's just interesting to see the shift over time of the hacker identity and where it goes. And then the idea, everyone started as a beginner. No one can say, I'm a hacker and you're not. It's about self-definition. It's what you believe. And that was fairly positive. There were a few people that didn't like that statement at all, though. They commented that they thought it was completely wrong, and if it's self-determination, well, anyone could be anything. Depends how you feel about that. And then this one, what makes me a hacker is not necessarily a skill set, but a mentality. I want to understand how it works. And that was very positive. A lot of agreement for the fact that it's not a skill set, it's how you think about things, how you address a problem. So because of that, I wanted to know, what do these people think is the most important thing for a hacker to have? 1 being the most important, 6 being the least important, and I threw in another category in case I hadn't thought of something. So quite obviously, the most important thing that people felt to be a hacker is the curiosity, desire for knowledge. That was the most important. Second, you've got passion and mentality, quite important. Third, technical ability. Technical ability doesn't come until third. Of my participants that I spoke to, I had someone who is a very high-up organizer in a world-famous conference. They didn't know that they would classify themselves as a hacker because they didn't code. I think, considering their involvement in this conference and everything they did, they're a hacker. But they weren't sure. Then you've got, passion and creativity, then quite important. It's sort of a bit of a mixture for the rest, but the clear answer, what is important in order to become a hacker, is the curiosity, the desire for knowledge. And that is something that has really shone through for all of my research. So, from all the data I've gathered, all the lurking I've done online, there's a clear social group process present. You can see people acting as a group, not too much to the groupthink, which is really nice. You can have elements of it, especially in the forums. People can get very carried away there. But other people will come and identify it. It's limited. It doesn't take it to the polarization. It doesn't lead to the wrong answers, necessarily. The fact that there are the group processes, it doesn't necessarily lead to organized action. Just because everyone's on the same page and agreeing about things doesn't mean anyone's really going to go do things about it. Those that identify as white hats, less affected by online disinhibition. I don't know if that's the cause or the effect, but white hats, less likely to go into toxic or benign disinhibition. They will act the same. But most white hats also acknowledge in the past they did do some things that are a bit dodgy. Don't know if there's a certain level of cognitive dissonance, which is sort of distancing yourself from it, or excusing your past behavior to yourself. However, the overall conclusion, hackers are really interested and engaged in what they do. There are so few groups out there that can claim this in such a positive way. And yeah, basically, it's been a real pleasure doing this work. and hopefully I'm going to turn my results into something useful for the world. And that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much. Can I take any questions? Yeah.
What sparked your interest in this?
I really like lurking online, and my previous background has been political identity, social identity. So social identity, lurking online, it was combining two things, and the university had a studentship for it, so they pay me to do this.
Have you considered, not only doing it online, but going, for example, to the CCC Congress and so on, where you get it still is a section of the hacker community, but you might expand your...
Yeah. I didn't go into it on this, partly through time, partly because I didn't feel that you all wanted to sit here and listen to my thoughts so much. I've done quite a lot of participant observation online and offline. I've been to various European and international hacking conferences, got my university to pay for me to go to DEF CON. The finance office was very worried when I said, I'm going to Las Vegas, can I have $250 in cash, please? But yes, so I've been to the conferences. I was fortunate enough to speak at the Social Engineering Village last year. I go, I observe, I sit quietly in the corner and make notes.
So did you collect data from
No,
there?
I did notice that some people have tried it. Hackers are a wary bunch. If someone walks up to you saying, would you like to answer these questions for me? And they start asking about your hacking history, people don't like that.
There's been a DVD called Hackers Are People Too, which was taken in Las Vegas.
Yep.
And they sort of did a bit like that. It was more qualitative than quantitative. So, yeah.
Yeah. My problem is it's just me for 3 years.
Yeah.
I really needed to nail down what I was doing. But yeah, I think it's becoming more of an open area of research. Yeah.
Of late, the hack community seems far more interested in mental health.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you asked any mental health questions, and did you find any differentiation between white hats, black hats, and also their political leanings?
I haven't, partly because, again, with a PhD, you have to keep it focused. So I'm on the social psychology, social identity. But I have been asked that before, whether or not there's a link with autism, for example, because the mindset, the liking maths, elements like that, they wondered if there was a link. It's possible. I've only had anecdotal responses to that. Mental health, no one's actually just brought that up that I've spoken to. And because it's not part of my focus, it wasn't something that I asked. But I think it's a really good point, and it is something that is getting talked about more, which I think is great.
Yeah, the first time it came on my radar was when Richard Tim, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, talked about it at DEFCON.
Mm-hmm.
He came across somebody that was basically had post-traumatic stress disorder from working in it because it's incurable.
Yeah. There was a talk, Richard Team, I think. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's the. Yeah. He was talking about that. I also had someone from DEF CON on the review board contact me because someone that I followed on Twitter had been posting some odd things, and she said, "I don't know if you know him personally. I'm a bit concerned about him. I'm trying to find someone that knows him to make sure that he's all right." I thought that was wonderful. Messaging complete strangers to try and help this one person who she didn't know. There was no link, but she'd just seen it and wanted to do something. I think that's really quite a nice thing to do. Yeah.
Other than not asking the question, are you a hacker? Or do you identify as a hacker? What are the differences do you see between surveys? The question I got is it sounds like there might be some bias in there because you are more familiar with people you're asking questions of.
Definitely, yeah, there is some bias. The first one, I didn't really know. I mean, it's all anonymized, so I don't know who responded, but because I have more contacts, it was shared more by other people. I think there probably is some bias, but as to what it is, I can't think right now, I'm afraid. Sorry. Oh, one thing I do know, obviously the gender disparity, but also it's incredibly Western. I speak English. I'm looking at English boards. So, yeah.
I was wondering
wonder if you saw any link between age groups and whether they identified as, or like where they identified on the scale of black hat to white hat. So a common, like an idea that I might say, like it seems common that people think black hats are younger. It's the I'm the edgy teen on 4chan. I start the script kiddie. I do black hat things. I want to make some money out of this. I start getting a bit more grey hat to make some money out of it and make a living. And then, I don't want to harm my children. I don't want to harm people around me. I go more white hat.
Had to grow up a bit. No, there is definitely elements of that in that as they progress. I mean, they say it with politics as well. You start off left-leaning, you end up right-leaning. It all depends on your age and where you grow up. But there is definitely that. It was the white hats that talked about their previous grey-black hat behaviour. The only people that acknowledged being black hat in the interviews were younger. I think a lot of people say grey hat because they don't really want to confine themselves to one or the other. They want to mix it up a bit. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.